My stepson Hunter thought the CEO title was his birthright. He fired me just 2 days after his mother, my wife, was lowered into the ground. He stood in the middle of my living room surrounded by his Ivy League friends and laughed as security escorted me out into the rain. He told me I was a relic. He told me the company needed a modern face. He thought he had won. What Hunter did not know was that he had only inherited the title, not the engine. He didn't know that I still own 80% of the intellectual property and assets that make the company run. He thought he was throwing out the trash, but he was actually throwing away the keys to the kingdom. Monday morning is going to be very interesting. My name is Alonzo Hayes. I am 68 years old. I have spent my life with grease under my fingernails and diesel fuel in my veins. I built Hayes Global Logistics from a single rusted pickup truck into a transportation empire. I know every bolt in every engine of my fleet. But to my stepson Hunter and his wife Kylie, I was just the help that stuck around too long. Before I tell you how I taught them the most expensive lesson of their lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by someone who has never worked a hard day in their life. The disrespect began before the dirt even hit the casket. It was a Tuesday in November, and Chicago was living up to its reputation. The wind cut across the cemetery like a razor carrying a freezing rain that soaked through my black wool coat. I stood by the open grave of Esther, the woman I had loved for 30 years. I did not feel the cold. I only felt the massive, gaping hole in my chest where my heart used to be. I wanted to stand there until the grave diggers finished. I wanted to make sure she was covered warm and safe. I owed her that respect. But Hunter had other plans. 50 yards away on the paved path, a black Mercedes SUV sat idling. The engine was running to keep the heater blasting. Through the tinted window I could see Hunter. He was not crying. He was not looking at his mother's coffin. He was looking at his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. He hadn't even stepped out onto the grass because he didn't want to get mud on his $2,000 Italian loafers. I watched the window roll down just 2 inches. Hunter shouted at the foreman of the cemetery crew. "Hey, can we speed this up? I have a schedule to keep." The foreman looked at me embarrassed. I nodded slowly, giving him permission to continue. That was the first strike. Hunter treated his mother's burial like a logistics delay, a traffic jam he needed to clear so he could get back to his comfortable life. I walked over to the car as the crew began to shovel the earth. I tapped on the glass. Hunter rolled the window down halfway. He looked annoyed, not grieving. "Get in, Alonzo. You're soaking wet and you smell like wet dog. We need to get to the reception. The board members are waiting." I looked at him. This boy was 32 years old. He had an MBA on his wall and a silver spoon in his mouth that I had paid for. I spoke quietly. "Your mother is being buried, Hunter. Turn off the engine and show some respect." He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "She's gone, Alonzo. Standing in the rain isn't going to bring her back. Besides, Kylie is waiting for us at the house to go over the catering bill." I turned my back on him and walked back to the grave. I stood there for another 20 minutes until the last spade of dirt smoothed over the mound. I said my final goodbye to Esther, promising her I would try to keep the peace. I didn't know then that peace was already impossible. The reception was held at our home, a sprawling estate in Lake Forest that Esther and I had bought 10 years ago. When I walked in dripping wet, it didn't feel like a house of mourning. It felt like a corporate mixer. The music was playing a little too loudly. The guests weren't family and neighbors. They were consultants, lawyers, and Hunter sycophants from the country club. They were drinking my vintage scotch and eating canapes, talking about stock prices and mergers. I went upstairs to change into a dry suit. When I came down, I tapped a spoon against a champagne glass. I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I wanted to tell them a story about how Esther used to handle the dispatch radio in the early days, how she kept the drivers awake with her jokes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice raspy. Before I could get the second sentence out, Hunter stepped in front of me. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first truck. He clapped his hands, cutting me off, stealing the room's attention. "Thank you all for being here," Hunter boomed, his voice practiced and smooth. "It is a sad day, but also a day of new beginnings. As per my mother's wishes and the board's ratification this morning, I am stepping into the role of CEO effective immediately." There was polite applause. I stood there stunned. We hadn't even read the will yet. But Hunter wasn't finished. He turned to me, a smile plastered on his face that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "And we have to thank Alonzo for his decades of service." Hunter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out to me in front of everyone. It wasn't a gift. It was a prop. Alonzo, we know how hard you've worked, but the company is moving in a new digital direction. We think it is time for you to finally rest. Inside this envelope is a very generous severance package and your retirement papers. We call it the Golden Parachute. The room went deadly silent. This was a public execution. He was firing me at my wife's funeral reception. He was handing me a pink slip while I was still grieving. I looked at the envelope. I didn't take it. Hunter. I said, my voice low and dangerous. What is this? It's called progress, Alonzo, he whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. You're a mechanic. You fix trucks. I run corporations. You don't fit the new image. Look at you. You're old. You're tired. And frankly, you're not the face of a tech-forward logistics firm. I looked around the room. I saw Kylie, his wife, smirking in the corner, sipping a martini. She gave a little wave. I realized then that this had been planned for months. They were just waiting for Esther to die. I took the envelope. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. An insult. A check that they thought would buy my silence. Is that it? I asked. Not quite, Hunter said. He snapped his fingers. Two men in dark suits stepped forward from the hallway. They weren't my usual security team. I knew all my guards by name. I knew their wives and their kids. These men were strangers, muscles for hire. Since you're no longer an employee or an executive, Hunter said, his voice rising so the room could hear, I can't have you on the premises with access to sensitive company data. And since the deed to this house is transferred to me as the primary beneficiary, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Leave, I repeated. This is my home, it was Hunter corrected. Now it's corporate housing for the CEO, which is me. You can pick up your personal effects from the office tomorrow. Security will escort you out. One of the guards stepped into my personal space. He put a hand on my elbow. It was a light touch, but the threat was heavy. I looked at Hunter. I looked at the boy I had raised since he was 10 years old, the boy I had taught to throw a baseball, the boy whose tuition I had paid. I didn't see a son. I saw a stranger. I pulled my arm away from the guard. I don't need help walking, I said. I straightened my tie. I looked Hunter dead in the eye. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. You are making a mistake, Hunter, I said calmly. Hunter laughed. A dry, arrogant sound. The only mistake was thinking you could stay in the big leagues forever, Alonzo. Go enjoy your retirement. Go fishing. Leave the business to the professionals. I nodded slowly. I gripped the envelope tightly in my hand. Careful, son, I said. That chair you are sitting in is hotter than you think, and the engine that drives this company, you don't have the key. I turned and walked to the front door. The guards followed me close like I was a criminal. Hunter called out behind me. Don't forget to leave your badge at the front desk tomorrow. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain was still falling. The door slammed shut behind me, locking with a heavy thud. I stood there for a moment looking at the closed door of the house I had paid for. I was 68 years old. I was wet, cold, and homeless. I had just been fired from the company I built with my bare hands. Most men would have broken down. Most men would have cried or banged on the door, but I am not most men. I walked down the long driveway toward the gate. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold metal of a flash drive I always kept with me. Hunter thought he had taken everything. He thought the company was just trucks and buildings and bank accounts. He forgot about the paperwork. He forgot that 10 years ago I separated the assets. He forgot that while he was partying in college, I was restructuring the holding company. I took out my phone. It was wet with rain. I dialed a number. Sienna, I said when she answered. Alonzo, is everything okay? I heard about the funeral. I am so sorry. Save the condolences, I said, my voice steady. Initiate Protocol 0. There was a pause on the line. Then the sharp voice of my lawyer cut through the static. Are you sure, Alonzo? Once we start this, there is no going back. It will cripple the operating company. I looked back at the mansion. I could see the silhouette of Hunter in the window raising a glass of my scotch. I am sure, I said. He wants to play CEO. Let's see how he drives a car with no engine. I hung up the phone and walked into the dark. Monday morning was coming, and it was going to be a bloodbath. I arrived at the headquarters of Hayes Global Logistics at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning. The building was a structure of steel and glass that I had commissioned 15 years ago. It stood tall against the gray Chicago skyline, a monument to 3 decades of sweat and sacrifice. I parked my black sedan in the visitor lot because I knew my reserved spot right next to the front doors would already be taken. I walked up the concrete steps, feeling the weight of the morning wind against my chest. I reached for the door handle, the same brass handle I had polished myself when the janitorial staff was short-handed, but it felt cold and foreign today. I walked into the lobby. The smell hit me first. For years, this lobby had smelled of lemon polish and fresh coffee, a welcoming scent that told our drivers they were home. Now it smelled of something sterile like ozone and expensive, soulless perfume. I walked toward the security turnstiles. I pulled my badge from my pocket. It was worn at the edges, a testament to how many times I had swiped it to come in early and leave late. I held it up to the scanner. Usually the machine would let out a cheerful chirp and the light would turn green. Today it let out a harsh, low buzz. The light flashed angry red. Access denied. I tried again. Buzz. Red light. I looked at the small screen. It did not say error. It said card deactivated. "Excuse me, sir," a voice called out from the reception desk. "You cannot be in this area without a pass." I turned to look at the desk. The old receptionist, Mrs. Higgins, who always had a jar of candy for the drivers and knew every employee's birthday, was gone. In her place sat a young woman I did not recognize. She was looking at me over the rim of her designer glasses, her fingers hovering over a sleek white keyboard. She looked bored and slightly annoyed that I was interrupting her morning scroll through social media. "I am Alonzo Hayes," I said, keeping my voice level. "I founded this company. I am here to collect my personal effects." She typed something into her computer and frowned. "I do not have an Alonzo Hayes in the active employee directory. You will have to wait over there by the wall while I call executive management to verify your story." She pointed to a sleek, uncomfortable-looking bench that had replaced the leather armchairs I had bought. I stood my ground. "Verify my story." The audacity was breathtaking. I looked up at the wall behind her. The large oil painting of the first truck I ever bought, a beat-up 1980 Ford, was gone. In its place was a giant neon sign that simply said, "Disrupt," in bright pink letters. This was not my company anymore. It was a playground for children who had never changed a tire in their lives. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Employees walked by people I had hired, people whose mortgages I had helped pay. They looked at the floor. They looked at their phones. They looked anywhere but at me. Fear is a powerful silencer. Hunter had clearly made an example of anyone who showed loyalty to the old regime. Finally, the elevator doors pinged open. It was not Hunter who stepped out. It was Kylie. She was wearing a white power suit that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. She walked across the marble floor, her high heels clicking a sharp, aggressive rhythm. She was not carrying a clipboard or a file. She was carrying a cardboard box. A simple brown beat-up cardboard box. She stopped 5 feet away from me. She did not say hello. She did not offer condolences for her mother-in-law. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, as if I were a stain on her pristine white carpet. "We anticipated you might show up, Alonzo," Kylie said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "So I took the liberty of packing up your office myself. We could not have you wandering the halls disrupting the workflow. We are very busy pivoting to the new model." She held the box out, but she did not hand it to me. She let it drop. The box hit the floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the silent lobby. I heard the distinct crack of glass breaking inside. "Oops," Kylie said, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Her eyes were dancing with malice. My hands slipped. "That box was so heavy. I do not know why you kept so much junk in a C-suite office. It really cluttered the aesthetic we are going for." I looked down at the box. Lying on top, half spilled out, was a framed photograph. It was the picture of Esther and me on the day we opened our first warehouse. We were covered in dust, tired but smiling like we owned the world. The glass over Esther's face was shattered. A jagged crack ran right through her smile. I slowly bent down. My knees ached, but I did not let show. I picked up the photograph. I brushed the glass shards off Esther's face with my thumb. "This is not junk, Kylie," I said softly. "This is history. History does not pay the bills, Alonzo." She snapped, her mask slipping. We are rebranding. We are getting rid of the old dusty blue-collar image. And that includes you and your sentimental trash. Look at this place. She gestured widely to the lobby. We are going to paint it all white, minimalist, clean, no more grease, no more old men telling war stories about the good old days. She kicked the box slightly with the toe of her shoe. Take your debris and go, Alonzo. Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you off the property for trespassing. I stood up, holding the broken picture frame against my chest. I looked at this woman who had married my stepson. She was hollow. She was all surface and no depth. She thought power was about furniture and logos. She had no idea that power was about leverage. I will go, I said. But remember this, Kylie, you can paint over the walls, but you cannot paint over the foundation. And I laid the foundation. Before she could answer, the automatic doors slid open behind me. Hunter walked in. He was flanked by 2 security guards. He looked fresh, rested, and arrogant. He saw the box on the floor and smirked. I see Kylie handled the trash, Hunter said. Good. But there is one more thing, Alonzo. He held out his hand, palm up. The keys, he said. I looked at him. Which keys? The company car, Hunter said. The Lincoln. It is a company asset, and since you are no longer an officer of the company, you cannot drive it. Also the phone. The one I know you have in your pocket. The bill is paid by Hayes Global. Hand it over. This was petty. He wanted to strip me of everything. He wanted to leave me on the curb with a box of broken glass, unable to drive, unable to call for a ride. He wanted to see me broken. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the keys to the Lincoln Town Car. I had driven that car for 8 years. It had over 200,000 miles on it. I loved that car. I dropped the keys into his hand. Then I took out the phone. I had already wiped the data the night before thanks to Protocol Zero. It was just a piece of plastic and glass now. I placed it in his hand on top of the keys. Is that everything, I asked? Or do you want the shirt off my back too? Hunter laughed, closing his fist around the keys. Keep the shirt, old man. You are going to need it. It is cold out there in the real world. He turned to the security guards. Make sure he walks off the property. If he stops, if he looks back, arrest him. I bent down and picked up the cardboard box. It was heavy with the weight of 30 years of memories. I held it with one arm. I held the broken picture of Esther with the other. I turned my back on Hunter and Kylie. I walked toward the door. The young receptionist watched me go, her mouth slightly open. I walked past the security guards. One of them, a man named Mike, who I had hired 5 years ago, looked like he wanted to say something. I saw the shame in his eyes. I gave him a small nod, letting him know I did not blame him. He had a family to feed. I stepped out into the biting wind. The door slid shut behind me. I was standing on the sidewalk. My car was in the lot, but it was not mine anymore. My office was gone. My title was gone. I began to walk. I did not look for a taxi. I just walked. The box dug into my side. The wind stung my eyes, but as I walked away from the glass tower I had built, I did not feel defeated. I felt lighter. They had taken the trappings of power. They had taken the symbols, but they had not taken the source. I walked 2 blocks to a small diner where I knew the coffee was hot and the owner knew my name. I sat down in a booth and placed the box on the seat opposite me. I asked the waitress for a black coffee and a quarter for the payphone in the back. Hunter and Kylie thought they had erased me. They thought that by taking my badge and my car they had deleted Alonzo Hayes. They were about to find out that you cannot delete the man who wrote the code. I drank the coffee. It tasted better than the fancy espresso in the new lobby. I looked at the broken picture of Esther. "Don't worry, honey," I whispered to the glass. "We are just getting started." I stood up and walked to the payphone. It was time to make the call that would turn their victory party into a funeral. I dropped the quarter in the slot. It made a solid, heavy sound, the sound of consequences falling into place. Monday was over. The erasure was complete. Now it was time for the rewrite. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and listened to the sounds of my new reality. The apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up in a part of Chicago where the streetlights flickered and the police sirens were a lullaby. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner, revealing layers of paint from decades past, like rings on a tree that had been poisoned. It was a 1-bedroom unit with a kitchenette that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. It was a far cry from the 10,000-square-foot mansion in Lake Forest with its heated floors and views of the lake. But as I looked around the cramped space, I did not feel fear. I felt a strange sense of familiarity. This was where I had started. This was the kind of place where Esther and I had lived when we were young, counting pennies to buy diesel for the truck. The radiator clanked and hissed, spitting out a dry heat that made my throat scratchy. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. A group of teenagers were gathered on the corner laughing and smoking. A stray dog was sniffing at a garbage bag. It was ugly, but it was real. In Lake Forest, the silence was expensive. Here, the noise was free. I had brought only the clothes on my back and the few items in the box Kylie had kicked across the lobby floor. I placed the broken picture of Esther on the small, wobbly nightstand. Even with the glass shattered, her smile lit up the dingy room. I touched her face through the cracks. "They took the house, Esther," I whispered, "but they cannot take the home we built inside us." I went to the small fridge. It was empty except for a carton of milk and a sandwich I had bought from the corner store. I realized I had not eaten in 24 hours. My stomach growled, but my appetite was gone. I was running on adrenaline and a cold, simmering rage. I was 68 years old, a multi-millionaire on paper eating a turkey sandwich in a room that cost less than Hunter's shoes. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. But the laughter died in my throat when I heard a heavy, hesitant knock at the door. I stiffened. Few people knew where I was. I had used cash to rent this place under a fake name to avoid Hunter's lawyers finding me too quickly. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the face on the other side, but I would recognize that grease-stained cap anywhere. It was Barney. I opened the door. Barney stood there twisting his cap in his large, calloused hands. He was wearing his Hayes Global Mechanic uniform, but the patch with his name on it had been ripped off, leaving a dark square on the chest. Barney was 60 years old. He had been with me for 35 of them. He was the first mechanic I ever hired. He knew the engines of my fleet better than he knew his own children. But today, the man who could fix a transmission in a blizzard looked broken beyond repair. "Boss Barney," said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know where else to go. I asked around at the diner. They said you might be here." "Come in, Barney," I said, stepping aside. "I don't have much to offer, but I have a chair." Barney walked in, looking around the small apartment with sad, tired eyes. He didn't judge. He just sat heavily on the cheap wooden chair by the window. He looked down at his work boots, which were scuffed and worn. "They fired me. Alonzo," Barney said softly. The words hung in the air like smoke. I knew Hunter was cleaning house, but I thought he would have the sense to keep the head of maintenance. You cannot run a logistics company without the man who keeps the wheels turning. Why, I asked. "Did they give a reason?" Barney let out a bitter laugh. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He smoothed it out on his knee. It was a termination notice. The reason listed was inability to adapt to new technological standards. Tech standards. I asked, confused. "Barney, you can diagnose an engine problem just by listening to the vibration. You are the best mechanic in the state." "That doesn't matter anymore," Barney said, tears welling up in his eyes. "Hunter brought in these new consultants. They gave us all iPads. They said we had to log every repair, every oil change, every tightened bolt into this new cloud system. I tried, Alonzo. I really tried. But my fingers are thick. I have arthritis. I pressed the wrong buttons. I couldn't navigate the menus fast enough." He looked up at me, and the pain in his face broke my heart. "Hunter came down to the garage this morning," Barney continued. "He saw me struggling with the tablet. He didn't ask about the truck I had just fixed in record time. He just looked at the tablet. He laughed Alonzo. He laughed at me. He told his assistant, 'Get rid of these dinosaurs. If they can't swipe a screen, they can't work for Hayes.'" Dinosaurs. I repeated the word, tasting like bile in my mouth. "It wasn't just me," Barney said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down his cheek into his gray beard. "He fired the whole senior crew. Old Tom, Big Mike, even Sally from dispatch. Anyone over 50. Anyone who didn't look like they belonged in a Silicon Valley startup. He fired us on the spot. No severance, no notice. He said since we couldn't use the new system we were in breach of contract." Barney put his face in his hands. "I have a mortgage, Alonzo. My wife needs insulin. I have 2 years until I can claim Social Security. I don't know what to do. Who is going to hire a 60-year-old mechanic who can't use an iPad?" I looked at Barney shaking in that cheap chair. This man had once driven a tow truck through a hurricane to save a stranded driver. He had worked double shifts without complaining when we were close to bankruptcy in the 90s. He was the backbone of the company, and Hunter had discarded him like a used oil filter because he didn't fit the aesthetic. This was not just business anymore. This was a crime against decency. Hunter wasn't just stealing my company. He was destroying the lives of the people who built it. He was erasing the human history of Hayes Global and replacing it with an algorithm. I stood up. The coldness in my chest was replaced by a fire, a white-hot inferno of protective rage. I walked over to Barney and put a hand on his shoulder. His jacket smelled of diesel and old sweat, the smell of honest work. "Listen to me, Barney," I said, my voice firm. "You go home to your wife. You tell her that Alonzo said everything is going to be fine. You tell her the insurance is not going to lapse." "But how?" Barney asked, looking up. "You're out too, boss. You're in this dump. You can't help us." I smiled a grim, tight smile. "I am down, Barney. But I am not out. And I am definitely not broke. Hunter thinks he took my power because he took my chair. He forgot that I own the building the chair sits in." I went to the nightstand and picked up the prepaid burner phone I had bought at the corner store. I dialed a number I had memorized long ago. It rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered. "Sienna Davis, attorney at law." "Sienna, it's Alonzo," I said. "Alonzo, I have been trying to reach you," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The board is in chaos. Hunter is announcing a partnership with TechStream tomorrow. He is claiming he has modernized the workforce." "He didn't modernize it," I said, looking at Barney. "He gutted it. He fired the senior maintenance crew. He fired Barney." There was a silence on the line. Sienna knew Barney. She knew he was family. "That foolish boy," Sienna whispered. "Does he not know that the maintenance records are required by federal law to be signed off by a certified master mechanic? He thinks an app can do it," I said. "But that is not why I am calling. Sienna, I want you to execute the nuclear option." "Alonzo, wait," she cautioned. "If we do that, we freeze everything. The accounts, the assets, the fleet. It will cost millions in lost revenue. It could bankrupt the operating company." I looked at Barney, who was wiping his eyes with a dirty rag. I looked at the peeling wallpaper. I thought about Hunter's Italian loafers and Kylie's smirk. "I don't care about the revenue," I said. "I built that company from zero. I can build it again. But I will not let him use my legacy to starve my people. Sienna, open the safe in your office. Pull out the operating agreement for Hayes Holdings. Look at Section 4, Paragraph C." I heard the sound of papers shuffling on the other end. Sienna was fast. "I have it," she said. "The clause regarding essential personnel and intellectual property integrity. Read it," I commanded. "It says..." Sienna paused, and I could hear the smile spreading in her voice. "It says that the lease of all heavy machinery and the license for the client database is contingent upon the continuous employment of key personnel designated by the chairman." "And who is the chairman?" I asked. "You are, Alonzo. And who are the designated key personnel?" She read further. "The list includes the chief operations officer and the head of maintenance." "Exactly," I said. By firing Barney, Hunter didn't just fire a mechanic. He violated the master lease agreement. He just legally voided his right to use my trucks. "I want you to draft the cease and desist order tonight," I said. "But don't send it yet. Let him have his press conference with TechStream tomorrow. Let him stand on that stage and brag about his high-tech future." "I understand," Sienna said. "We hit him when the spotlight is brightest." "Precisely. And Sienna, transfer $50,000 from my personal trust to Barney's account. Tell him it is a consulting fee. I need him to be ready." "Ready for what?" Barney asked, standing up, hope returning to his eyes. "Ready to get back to work," I said. I hung up the phone. Outside, the sirens wailed, but they didn't sound like a lullaby anymore. They sounded like a warning. Hunter wanted a war between the old and the new. He wanted to crush the dinosaurs. He was about to learn that T-Rex was a dinosaur too, and it had a bite that could snap a Mercedes in half. "Go home, Barney," I said. "Get some sleep." Monday was hard, but Tuesday is going to be historic. Barney nodded, put his cap back on, and walked out the door. I locked it behind him. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The wind rattled the glass, but I didn't feel the chill. I felt the engine humming. The purge was over. The counterattack had begun. The next morning, I sat in my cramped kitchen and watched the world change through the cracked screen of my prepaid smartphone. I had created a fake profile to monitor the company's social media accounts. Hunter was live streaming. He was walking through the executive suite of Hayes Global. The walls I had painted a sensible beige were now a jarring bright orange. The mahogany desk where I had signed checks for 30 years was gone. In its place stood a glass table that looked like it would shatter if you put a heavy work boot on it. Hunter held the camera high, angling it to show off his tailored suit and the view of the city. He was talking fast, using words that meant nothing: synergy, paradigm shift, disruption. He walked past the open door of the conference room. I saw the faces of the new hires. They were young. They were terrified. They were looking at him not with respect but with confusion. Then my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen flashed the name Hunter. He was calling me while live streaming. He wanted an audience for his victory lap. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I knew he would just keep calling. I slid my thumb across the screen. Alonzo Hunter shouted into the phone. The background noise on his end was loud. "I hope you are watching the feed. We are about to make history." "I am watching, Hunter," I said. "You painted the walls orange. It looks like a prison cafeteria." Hunter laughed. "That is the color of innovation, old man. But listen, I am calling to give you a heads up. In 1 hour I am signing the exclusive partnership with TechStream. We are going to be the first fully automated logistics fleet in the Midwest. No more grease monkeys, no more paper logs, just pure data." I leaned back in my rickety chair. TechStream. I knew them well. Their CEO was a shark named Julian. He had tried to pitch me his software 5 years ago. I had read his contract. It was a vampire deal. It sucked the life out of the service provider and gave all the control to the software company. "Be careful, Hunter," I said quietly. TechStream demands 99% uptime. If a single truck breaks down and delays a shipment, the penalties are severe. Hunter scoffed. "That is old thinking, Alonzo. That is why you are out and I am in. With their algorithms, trucks won't break down. It is called predictive maintenance. Welcome to Industry 4.0. You should look it up if you can figure out how to use Google." He hung up before I could answer. He wanted the last word. He wanted to feel like the smartest man in the room. He did not realize that by insulting me, he was blinding himself to the cliff he was walking toward. I switched off the phone and turned on the small television I had found at a pawn shop. It was time for the main event. The local business news channel was covering the signing ceremony live. They called it the merger of the century for Chicago transport. The camera cut to the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. It was filled with reporters and photographers. Hunter stood on a raised platform next to Julian from TechStream. Julian looked like a predator who had just spotted a wounded gazelle. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold. Kylie was there too, standing just behind Hunter. She was wearing a dress that sparkled under the lights, looking at the cameras, desperate for fame. On the table in front of them sat 2 thick leather binders, the contracts. I sat forward, my eyes fixed on the screen. This was the moment. This was the trap I had set years ago without even knowing it. When I had rejected TechStream back then, I had drafted a counter-proposal. I had created a standard for fleet maintenance that was so high, so rigorous, that only a team of master mechanics could meet it. I had filed that standard as the Hayes Protocol. When Hunter fired Barney and the senior crew, he destroyed the only team capable of executing the Hayes Protocol. But here was the trick. I knew Julian. I knew he was lazy. He would use the template from our previous negotiations because he thought I was a genius at operations. He would include the Hayes Protocol in the appendix because he wanted to guarantee quality. Hunter picked up a gold pen. He looked at the cameras. He flashed his teeth. He did not open the binder. He did not read the fine print. He did not turn to Appendix C subsection 4. If he had, he would have seen the clause. It stated that any failure to maintain the fleet according to the certified Hayes Protocol would result in immediate default. It stated that in the event of default, the software provider could seize the assets of the operating company to cover the losses. Hunter signed his name with a flourish. He signed it big and bold. He was signing his own death warrant. Julian signed next. I saw the look in Julian's eyes. He knew. He knew Hunter was an amateur. He knew he was signing a deal with a man who had just fired his entire support system. Julian was not partnering with Hayes Global. He was preparing to eat it alive. The room erupted in applause. Flashbulbs popped like lightning. Hunter hugged Kylie. They looked like royalty. They looked invincible. I watched as Hunter shook Julian's hand. The microphone picked up Hunter's voice. "To the future," Hunter said. To the future, Julian replied. I turned off the TV. The screen went black, and I saw my own reflection in the glass. I was not smiling. I was not cheering. My face was a mask of cold resolve. Hunter had just promised a 99% uptime guarantee using a fleet of trucks that were due for their quarterly overhaul next week. He had promised this while firing the only men who knew how to overhaul them. He had signed a contract that demanded certified expert maintenance right after banning the experts from the building. He thought he was entering the digital age. In reality, he had just walked into a buzzsaw. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky was dark heavy with another storm. It was fitting. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to hit Hunter's desk. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Barney. It is done. Get the boys ready. Barney replied instantly. We are ready, boss. I looked back at the blank TV screen. Enjoy the champagne, Hunter, I said to the empty room. Drink it all. Because by this time next week, you won't even be able to afford the water. The trap was sprung. The jaws were open. Now all I had to do was wait for the first truck to stall. And with the Chicago winter coming, I knew I wouldn't have to wait long. Monday was interesting. But the rest of the week was going to be a disaster for them, and a masterclass for everyone else. While 70 miles outside of Chicago, a disaster was unfolding on the shoulder of Interstate 90, my stepson was busy toasting to his own brilliance. The wind was howling across the plains, dropping the temperature to 10 degrees below zero. Truck number 452, a beast of a machine that had been the pride of my fleet, sat dead in the darkness. The driver was a man named Miller. He had been with me for 15 years. He was a good man with 3 kids and a mortgage. He knew his truck better than he knew his own wife. When the engine started to cough and the temperature gauge spiked into the red, Miller knew exactly what was wrong. It was the high-pressure oil pump. It was a known issue with that model year. In the old days, Miller would have called Barney directly on the radio. Barney would have diagnosed it in 10 seconds. He would have told Miller exactly which valve to tap to get it limping to the next service station where a replacement part would already be waiting. But Barney was gone. His radio channel was dead silence. Instead, Miller had to use the new app on the iPad Hunter had installed in every cab. He tapped the screen with freezing fingers. He navigated through 5 different menus just to report a breakdown. When he finally got through to the dispatch center, he wasn't talking to a mechanic. He was talking to a call center agent in another country who had never seen a semi-truck in real life. Please hold while I create a ticket, the voice said pleasantly. I am freezing to death out here, Miller shouted into the phone. The engine is dead. I need a tow and a mechanic. I understand, sir, the voice replied. But according to the system, your truck was marked as serviced yesterday. The predictive maintenance software says it should be running at 100% efficiency. The software is wrong, Miller yelled, watching his breath turn to ice on the windshield. The oil pump is blown. Send help. I cannot override the system, sir, the agent said. I will flag this for review by a manager on Monday morning. Please stay with your vehicle. Miller threw the iPad onto the passenger seat. He wrapped himself in his blanket and looked out at the snow whipping past. He was alone. He was cold. And he knew that the cargo in the back, $50,000 worth of fresh produce, would be frozen solid by sunrise. The fleet was bleeding, but the new captain was too busy looking in the mirror to notice the wound. Back in the city, the ballroom of the Drake Hotel was warm and smelled of expensive perfume and arrogance. Kylie had outdone herself. She had taken the emergency maintenance fund, the money I kept in a separate account, for exactly the kind of situation Miller was facing, and she had spent it on a party. She called it the Hayes Global Rebranding Gala. I stood at the back of the room, hidden in the shadows of a large pillar, and watched them burn my legacy. There were ice sculptures in the shape of the new logo. There were waitstaff circulating with trays of caviar and champagne. The flowers alone must have cost more than a replacement engine. Kylie was wearing a silver dress that looked like it was made of diamonds. She was laughing loudly, holding court with a group of bankers and fashion influencers who had never shipped a package in their lives. Hunter stood next to her looking like a prince who had just been crowned. He was telling a story to a group of investors, gesturing wildly with his hands. I could tell by the way he was moving that he was lying. He was selling them a dream that was built on a foundation of crumbling concrete. I adjusted my tuxedo. It was a classic black suit tailored to fit me perfectly 20 years ago. It was not trendy. It was not slim fit. It was authoritative. I walked out of the shadows and into the light. The room went quiet. It started as a ripple near the door and spread like a wave until even the jazz band stopped playing. Heads turned. Whispers started. Why is he here? I thought he was fired. Is that Alonzo? I walked straight through the center of the crowd. I did not look down. I did not apologize for my presence. People parted for me like the Red Sea. I saw the look on their faces. It was not pity anymore. It was respect. They saw a man who carried himself with the dignity of a founder. Hunter saw me coming. His smile faltered. He looked at the security guards by the door, but they were not moving. I had walked in with Julian, the CEO of TechStream. Julian had invited me personally, thinking it would be a funny power play to have the old lion watch the young wolf eat. Julian did not know that the old lion still had teeth. I stopped right in front of Hunter and Kylie. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on Hunter's forehead despite the air conditioning. "What are you doing here, Alonzo?" Hunter hissed, keeping his voice low so the investors wouldn't hear. "You are not on the list." I smiled. It was a cold smile. Julian insisted I said, my voice deep and steady. He wanted me to see the future of logistics. Kylie stepped forward. She looked at my tuxedo and sneered. "You look like a waiter, Alonzo. Did you come to bus tables because we are fully staffed?" I looked at Kylie. I looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist. I knew exactly how much it cost because I knew exactly how much was in the maintenance fund she had raided. "That is a lovely bracelet, Kylie," I said. "It cost the same as 3 transmission rebuilds. I hope it is worth it when the invoices start coming due." Kylie turned pale. She didn't know I knew about the fund. Hunter stepped between us, trying to puff out his chest. "Get out," he whispered violently. "Get out before I have you thrown out. You are ruining the vibe." "I am not the one ruining anything, Hunter," I said. I leaned in close to his ear. The music started up again, covering our conversation, but I made sure he heard every word. Right now, truck 452 is sitting dead on Interstate 90. The driver is freezing. The load is destroyed. Hunter rolled his eyes. "Stop with the drama, Alonzo. The system shows green across the board. The system is a screen," I said. "The reality is oil and steel. You have a leak, Hunter. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. The high-pressure valve on the entire fleet of 2018 models is faulty. I had a schedule to replace them starting Monday, but you fired the team that was going to do it." Hunter laughed. He actually laughed. "You are trying to scare me. You are jealous because I am the CEO and you are nothing. Go home, old man. Go home and watch TV." I stepped back. I looked at him with genuine pity. "I am going home, Hunter. Home. But you should check your phone. The driver just called the state police to rescue him because your dispatch center left him to die. When the police report hits the news tomorrow, remember this moment. Remember that I told you there was a leak and you chose to buy ice sculptures instead of patches." I turned and walked away. I did not stay for the food. I did not stay for the speeches. I walked out of the ballroom past the confused security guards and out into the cold Chicago night. As I waited for my ride, I checked my phone. I had received a text from Barney. "Truck 452 is down. Miller is safe. The cops got him. But the load is gone. And Alonzo. 3 more drivers just reported check engine lights." I looked back at the hotel. I could see the lights of the party shining through the windows. They were celebrating inside a burning building. The oil leak had started. It started small, just a drop on the highway. But by morning, it would be a flood that would wash away everything Hunter thought he owned. I got into the taxi. To the south side, I told the driver. Monday was interesting, Tuesday was a tragedy, but Wednesday was going to be Judgment Day. By Thursday morning, the panic in the executive suite had reached a fever pitch. Truck number 452 was just the beginning. By noon, 3 more trucks had stalled on their routes due to the same high-pressure oil pump failure. The cargo was rotting in trailers all over the Midwest. The clients were screaming on the phones. TechStream was sending threatening emails about breach of contract and service-level agreements. Hunter was drowning. He sat in my old leather chair, which he had not yet managed to replace, and stared at the financial reports on his computer screen. He was looking for a miracle. He was looking for cash to pay for emergency repairs because he had already spent the maintenance reserve on flowers and champagne. That was when he found it. I knew he would find it eventually. I had practically left the breadcrumbs for him. Hunter was digging through the automated payment history of the last 10 years, trying to see where the money was going. He saw a recurring monthly transfer of $50,000 going to an entity listed as Hayes Intellectual Properties, LLC. To a mind like Hunter's, a mind that was trained to look for shortcuts and scams. This did not look like a legitimate business expense. It looked like a smoking gun. I can imagine the smile spreading across his sweaty face. He did not bother to check the corporate registry. He did not bother to ask the legal department for the founding documents of Hayes YP. He just saw money leaving the company and going into an account that he did not control. He assumed it was a slush fund. He assumed that I, the old mechanic from the South Side, had been skimming off the top for decades. He thought he had found the leverage he needed to destroy me. He thought he had found the reason why the company was cash poor. He did not realize that Hayes YP was the entity that owned the patents for the logistics software he was currently failing to operate. He did not realize he was looking at the rent check, not the robbery. But Hunter did not care about facts. He cared about narratives, and he had just found a narrative that could turn him from an incompetent CEO into a hero who exposed corruption. He picked up the phone. He did not call the company general counsel because he knew they were loyal to the truth. He called a man named Sterling. Sterling was a lawyer who specialized in destruction. He was the kind of man you hired when you wanted to bury someone so deep they would never see the sun again. I heard about the meeting from a janitor who was still on the payroll. Hunter and Sterling spent 4 hours in the conference room. They drafted a complaint that painted me as a mastermind criminal. They alleged that I had embezzled millions of dollars through shell companies. They alleged that the reason the trucks were breaking down was not because of Hunter's negligence, but because I had been siphoning off maintenance funds for my own retirement. It was a beautiful lie. It was perfect in its construction. It took all of Hunter's failures and pinned them on my supposed greed. Hunter wanted blood. He told Sterling that he did not just want a lawsuit. He wanted an arrest. He wanted the world to see Alonzo Hayes in handcuffs. He wanted to humiliate me the way he felt humiliated by the breakdown of his fleet. He wanted to wipe out my legacy so completely that history would only remember me as a thief. He instructed Sterling to bypass the usual civil procedures and go straight to the district attorney. He used his family's connections and the prestige of the Hayes name to fast-track the warrant. He spun a story about flight risk. He told them I was planning to leave the country with the stolen millions. I was sitting in my apartment when the news broke. My phone buzzed with an alert. A business blog had leaked the story. The headline read, "Former Hayes Global Chairman Accused of Massive Embezzlement Scheme." I read the article calmly. It quoted anonymous sources close to the investigation. It detailed the transfers to Hayes YP as evidence of a long-running fraud. It said that Hunter Whitmore, the brave young CEO, had uncovered the rot at the heart of the company. I put the phone down. I looked around my small, dingy apartment. If I had stolen millions, I was certainly doing a terrible job of enjoying it. I looked at the peeling paint. I looked at the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Hunter really believed that I was a criminal. He could not conceive of a world where a man works hard and structures his business legally. He projected his own greed onto me. He thought everyone was a thief because he was a thief. He had stolen my company, so he assumed I must have stolen his money. I stood up and went to the closet. I took out my best suit. It was a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that Esther had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I put on a crisp white shirt. I tied my tie with steady hands. I polished my shoes until they shone in the dim light. I was not going to meet them in my pajamas. I was not going to look like the tired old man they wanted me to be. I was going to look like the chairman. The sun had set and the street lights were casting long orange shadows on the walls. I sat in the wooden chair facing the door. I placed my hands on my knees. I waited. I knew how these things worked. They would not come during the day. They wanted the spectacle of a night raid. They wanted the blue lights flashing in the dark to scare the neighbors. At 9 o'clock, I heard the sirens. They started as a wail in the distance and grew louder until they filled the small room. I stood up and walked to the window. 2 squad cars had pulled up to the curb. A black unmarked sedan pulled up behind them. I saw Hunter get out of the sedan. He was wearing a trench coat standing next to a man I assumed was Sterling. He wanted to watch. He wanted to see the takedown with his own eyes. I heard the heavy footsteps on the stairs. They were not being quiet. They wanted everyone in the building to know that a dangerous criminal was being apprehended. Boom, boom, boom. The boots hit the landing. Police, open up. The shout shook the thin doorframe. I did not make them break it down. I did not want my landlord to have to pay for repairs. I walked to the door and unlocked it. I turned the handle and swung it open. 3 officers stood there. Their hands were on their holsters. They looked tense, ready for a fight. They saw a 68-year-old man in an impeccable suit standing tall and calm. They hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Alonzo Hayes," the lead officer asked. "I am Alonzo Hayes," I said. My voice was steady. It did not tremble. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, grand larceny, and corporate fraud," the officer said. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." I turned around slowly. I felt the cold steel of the cuffs click around my wrists. They were tight, but I did not complain. I kept my head high. As they led me out into the hallway, my neighbors were peeking out of their doors. Mrs. Gable from 3B was covering her mouth with her hand. The young couple from 3A looked terrified. "It is all right," I told them as I walked past. "It is just a misunderstanding. Go back to sleep." They marched me down the stairs and out onto the street. The cold wind hit my face, but the adrenaline kept me warm. The blue and red lights were blinding. A small crowd had gathered, and there, standing by the hood of the black sedan, was Hunter. He was smiling. It was a wide, victorious smile. He held up his phone and took a picture of me in handcuffs. "Smile for the camera, Alonzo," he called out. "This is going to be the cover of Forbes, the rise and fall of a thief." I stopped for a moment. The officer tried to push me forward, but I planted my feet. I looked straight at Hunter. I looked past the arrogance and the expensive coat. I looked right into his soul. "You think you have won, Hunter?" I said, loud enough for him to hear over the sirens. "You think this is the end, but you just handed me the microphone, and when I speak, the whole world is going to hear the truth." Hunter laughed. He waved his hand dismissively. "Take him away, boys. I have a company to save from his mess." The officer pushed my head down and guided me into the back of the squad car. The door slammed shut. The cage separated me from the world. I leaned back against the hard plastic seat. I closed my eyes. Hunter had taken the bait. He had escalated the conflict to a criminal level. He had brought the police and the courts into our dispute. He did not know it yet, but he had just activated the final phase of my plan. By arresting me, he had given me the platform to reveal the true ownership of Hayes Global in a court of law. He had just sued the landlord for entering his own building. The car pulled away. I watched Hunter through the rear window. He was shaking hands with Sterling, celebrating his victory. He looked happy. It was the last time I would ever see him smile. Monday was interesting. Tuesday was a tragedy. Wednesday was judgment. But tonight was the sacrifice. And tomorrow I would rise. The holding cell at the Chicago Central Precinct smelled of bleach and dried sweat. It was a smell I knew from my youth, back before I built the empire, back when I was just a kid from the South Side trying to survive. I sat on the cold metal bench and watched the small television mounted in the corner of the room. It was tuned to the 24-hour news cycle, and my face was on every channel. They had used a mugshot from 30 years ago, a booking photo from a protest I had attended in my 20s. Beside it, they placed a photo of Hunter. He looked polished, concerned, and heartbroken. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen in bright red letters. "Logistics tycoon arrested in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scandal." The news anchor, a woman with perfect hair and a serious expression, was reading the script Hunter had undoubtedly fed her. She spoke about how the young, innovative CEO Hunter Whitmore had discovered a massive financial black hole in the company accounts. She spoke about betrayal. She said that while the company was struggling to modernize, its former chairman had been draining its resources to fund a secret life. I watched as they interviewed people on the street. "Do you think he is guilty?" the reporter asked a young man in a hoodie. The man shrugged. "Rich guys are always stealing something," he said. "It does not surprise me." I leaned my head back against the concrete wall. In the span of 3 hours, Hunter had destroyed a reputation I had spent 40 years building. To the city of Chicago, I was no longer the man who donated to food banks and sponsored youth baseball teams. I was a thief. I was a greedy old man who stole from his own stepson. The shame should have been crushing. It should have made me want to hide my face. But I did not feel shame. I felt a cold, calculating resolve. Hunter had played his card. He had gone all in. He had used the media and the police to paint a picture of guilt. But he had forgotten one thing. Paint can be washed away, but documents are written in ink. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. A detective walked in. He was a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. He carried a thick file folder. He did not look like a man who enjoyed his job. He looked like a man who wanted to close a case and go home. He sat down at the metal table, bolted to the floor, and gestured for me to sit opposite him. "My name is Detective Miller," he said, opening the file. "We have the bank records, Mr. Hayes. We have the transfer logs. $50,000 a month going into a shell company called Hayes Intellectual Properties. It looks pretty bad." I sat down. I did not slouch. I folded my hands on the table. It looks bad because you are looking at it through a keyhole, detective, I said calmly. You are seeing the money leave, but you are not asking where it is going or why. It is going to you, Miller said, tapping a document. You are the sole signatory of Hayes Intellectual Properties. You are paying yourself with company money. That is embezzlement. I shook my head slowly. No, detective. That is rent. Miller paused. He looked up from the file. Excuse me, I leaned forward. I spoke slowly so there would be no confusion. Hayes Global Logistics is an operating company. It employs the drivers, it buys the fuel, it manages the contracts. But it does not own the assets. It does not own the trucks. It does not own the software code. And it certainly does not own the brand name. All of those assets are owned by a holding company, Hayes Intellectual Properties. Miller frowned. He flipped through the pages in his file. I don't see any lease agreements here. That is because Hunter did not give them to you, I said. Hunter does not even know they exist. He found a payment schedule and assumed it was theft. But if you look at the corporate charter of Hayes Global, filed 10 years ago with the Secretary of State, you will see a master service agreement. It states clearly that the operating company must pay a monthly licensing fee to the holding company for the use of the brand and the proprietary logistics software. I sat back. The $50,000 is not stolen money, detective. It is a discounted rate. Market value would be double that. I was being generous to the company because I was the chairman. Miller stopped tapping the paper. He looked at me, then back at the file. He was starting to see the cracks in the story. He was a seasoned cop. He knew the difference between a criminal and a businessman. If this is true, Miller said slowly, then there is no crime. It is just a business dispute. It is not even a dispute, I corrected him. It is a contractual obligation. And by stopping those payments and by having me arrested for collecting them, Hunter has just triggered a default clause. The door opened again. This time it was not a guard. It was the precinct captain. I recognized him, Captain Reynolds. We had served on a charity board together 5 years ago. He looked at me, then at the detective, then at the file on the table. Alonzo Reynolds said, his voice heavy with confusion. What in the hell is going on? I get a call from the district attorney saying you are the Bernie Madoff of the trucking industry. Then I come down here and see you sitting here like you are running a board meeting. I smiled at Reynolds. It was a genuine smile this time. Hello, Captain, I said. Your detective here is just realizing that he has been used as a pawn in a corporate takeover attempt. I explained the situation again. I told them about the holding company. I told them about the software ownership. I told them about the payments. As I spoke, I saw the realization dawn on Reynolds' face. He was a smart man. He realized that his department had been manipulated by a vindictive stepson to settle a family score. So let me get this straight, Reynolds said, leaning against the wall. You are not stealing money. You are the landlord, and the tenant just called the cops on you for collecting the rent. That is an accurate summary, I said. Reynolds looked at Miller. Check the Secretary of State database. Verify the holding company ownership. Now. Miller scrambled to his laptop. The room was silent for 2 minutes. The only sound was the clicking of keys and the hum of the ventilation system. Then Miller stopped typing. He looked up, his face pale. He is right, Captain. Hayes. Intellectual Properties is a registered LLC. Alonzo Hayes is the owner. The master service agreement is listed in the public filings. It is all legal. Reynolds let out a long breath. He rubbed his temples. He looked angry, not at me, but at the situation. That little son of a Reynolds muttered. He played us. He wanted a perp walk. He wanted the photo op. I stood up. The handcuffs were still chafing my wrists. He wanted to destroy me, Captain, I said. But he just handed me the weapon I needed. By arresting me, you have created a public record of the dispute. You have validated the existence of the holding company. Reynolds walked over and unlocked the handcuffs himself. The metal clicked open and the blood rushed back into my hands. I am sorry, Alonzo, Reynolds said. We were acting on a warrant sworn by the CEO. We had to bring you in. I rubbed my wrists. I understand. You were doing your job. But now I need you to do me a favor. Reynolds looked wary. What kind of favor? Release me, I said. But do not announce it. Do not call the press. Let the media run with the story that I am in jail. Let Hunter believe that I am rotting in this cell all weekend. Why, Miller asked. Why would you want people to think you are a criminal? Because I said, walking to the mirror on the wall to straighten my tie. Monday is the shareholder meeting. Hunter is going to walk into that room thinking he has won. He is going to be arrogant. He is going to be unprepared. I want him to feel the full weight of his victory before I pull the rug out from under him. Reynolds looked at me for a long moment. He saw the fire in my eyes. He knew that this was not just about business anymore. This was about justice. "We can release you on your own recognizance pending further investigation," Reynolds said carefully. "If you happen to slip out the back door and avoid the reporters, that is not something I can control." "Thank you, Captain," I said. I gathered my things, my wallet, my watch, the keys to the apartment I was renting. I signed the release paperwork with a steady hand. As I walked toward the back exit, Detective Miller called out to me. "Mr. Hayes," he said. "One question. If you own the software and Hunter just arrested you for collecting payment on it, what happens to the software now?" I stopped and looked back. "The contract says that in the event of a hostile legal action against the owner, the license is revoked immediately," I said. Miller's eyes widened. "You mean..." "I mean that the entire Hayes Global fleet is currently running on pirated software," I said. "And come Monday morning, I am going to turn it off." I walked out into the alleyway behind the precinct. The night air was crisp and cold. The city was asleep, unaware of the bomb that was ticking down. Hunter was probably popping champagne right now. He was probably toasting to my demise. He did not know that he had just locked himself in a cage with a tiger, and he had thrown away the key. I pulled my coat tight around me and began the long walk back to my apartment. I had 48 hours to prepare. I had 48 hours to gather the final pieces of evidence. I had 48 hours to let the world believe the lie so that the truth would shine even brighter when I revealed it. The silence of the night was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with anticipation. The storm was over. The flood was coming, and I was the one who controlled the dam. The silent chairman was about to speak, and his voice would shake the foundations of the earth. Sunday was supposed to be their victory lap. While I sat in my small apartment reading a paperback novel and drinking instant coffee, Hunter and Kylie were popping corks in the executive penthouse of the Hayes Global Tower. They had spent the morning giving interviews to business journals describing how they had saved the company from the corruption of the past. They painted themselves as the heroes who had excised the cancer. I was the cancer. They were the surgeons. They believed the lie so completely that they had forgotten who built the hospital. I can picture the scene perfectly because I know them. I know that Kylie would have ordered the most expensive catering platter available even though it was just the two of them. She would be wearing one of her designer dresses, treating the empty office like a runway. Hunter would be sitting in my chair with his feet up on the desk holding a glass of vintage Dom Perignon. He would be looking out at the city feeling like a king. He thought the hard part was over. He thought sending me to jail was the checkmate. He did not realize that by arresting me he had not ended the game, he had simply started the clock on a bomb that was ticking beneath his feet. They were celebrating a theft they thought was a business strategy. Hunter was probably scrolling through his phone, reading the comments on the articles that bashed my reputation. "Look at this, Kylie," he would say. "Everyone is on our side. The stock is going to skyrocket on Monday." They were drunk on their own ego. They were so busy congratulating themselves on taking the keys to the castle that they never bothered to check if the locks had been changed. They ignored the fact that a company is not just a collection of trucks and buildings. It is a system, and systems run on rules. At exactly noon on Sunday, the rule that I had written into the core code of the Hayes Logistics operating system executed itself. It was a simple command, a few lines of code that I had programmed with the help of a young developer 10 years ago. It was a fail-safe, a dead man's switch. The system was programmed to ping the central server of Hayes intellectual properties every 24 hours to verify the license key. If the server returned a specific error code indicating a legal breach, the operating system would interpret it as a hostile takeover. At 11:59, Hunter was the CEO of a global logistics empire. At 12 o'clock and 1 second, he was the captain of a sinking ship. The change did not happen with an explosion. It happened with a flicker. The massive 80-inch monitors that lined the wall of the command center were displaying the real-time GPS locations of 3,000 trucks. It was a beautiful web of green lights moving across the map of North America. It was the heartbeat of the company. Then all at once the green lights stopped moving. Hunter probably didn't notice it at first. He was likely pouring another glass of champagne. But then the screens flickered. The map disappeared. The complex data streams, the weather reports, the fuel efficiency metrics, and the delivery timelines all vanished. In their place, a single solid block of color filled every screen in the room. Red. A bright, angry crimson red that illuminated the office with the color of emergency. Kylie would have been the first to scream. She hated ugly things, and this was ugly. "What did you do, Hunter?" she would have yelled, dropping her glass. "Why are the screens red?" Hunter would have scrambled out of my chair. He would have run to the main console. He would have pounded on the keyboard thinking it was a screensaver or a glitch. But the keyboard was dead. The mouse was unresponsive. In the center of the giant red wall, a message appeared in bold white letters. It was not a cryptic error code. It was a message I had written myself. License expired. Authorization revoked due to breach of contract. System locked. Please contact the intellectual property holder immediately. Hunter stared at the words. He read them once. He read them twice. He blinked, trying to make the alcohol-induced haze disappear. Contact the intellectual property holder. He knew who that was. He had just arrested him. "This is a bug," Hunter muttered, his hands shaking. "This is just a computer glitch. I will call IT." He grabbed his phone and dialed the number for the new IT director. He had hired a kid named Jason who was 24 years old and wore flip-flops to work. "Jason, fix the screens." Hunter shouted into the phone. "Everything is red. It says license expired." "I know, boss," Jason replied, his voice trembling. "It is not just the screens in your office. It is everything. The server room is flashing red. The dispatch computers are locked. Even the coffee machine in the break room is digital and it is displaying the same error." "Reboot it," Hunter screamed. "Just unplug it and plug it back in." "We did," Jason said. "We rebooted the mainframes 3 times. It comes back to the same screen. It is a hard lock. It is embedded in the firmware. The system is asking for a cryptographic key to unlock it. Do you have the key?" "I do not have a key," Hunter yelled. "I am the CEO. I should not need a key. Bypass it. Hack it. Do something." "I cannot hack it," Jason said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "This is military-grade encryption. Whoever wrote this code built a trapdoor and they just pulled the lever. We are locked out of our own database." Hunter dropped the phone. He looked at Kylie. She was standing by the window, her face pale. The red light from the screens reflected in her eyes, making her look like a demon. "Fix this, Hunter," she hissed. "We have a party tonight. We have investors coming tomorrow. Fix this now." But Hunter could not fix it. And then the phone started ringing. It began as a single ringtone from the reception desk outside the office. Then another. Then the emergency line in the command center. Within 30 seconds, the room was filled with a cacophony of ringing phones. It was the sound of 1,000 problems arriving at once. Hunter stared at the blinking lights on the phone console. He was afraid to answer. But he had no choice. He walked over and pressed the speakerphone button. What he heard was not a polite customer inquiry. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated rage. "This is Dispatch Unit 4 in Ohio," a voice screamed over the static. "My entire dashboard just went black. I am doing 65 miles an hour on the turnpike, and my navigation is gone. My electronic logging device is dead. I cannot legally drive this truck without a log. What is going on?" Hunter tried to speak, but another line cut in. "This is the warehouse manager in Detroit. The inventory scanners are down. The robotic sorting arms just froze in midair. I have 40 tons of perishable seafood on the loading dock and I cannot move it because the automated gates won't open. The temperature is rising. This fish is going to rot in 2 hours." Hunter switched lines again. "This is the Port Authority in New Jersey. Your trucks are blocking the entrance to the terminal. Their electronic gate passes are being rejected. You have created a traffic jam 3 miles long. Move your vehicles or we will start impounding them." Hunter backed away from the console. He looked at his hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. He looked at the red screens. The message seemed to be mocking him. License expired. It was not just a software crash. It was a physical shutdown. The modern trucks that Hunter was so proud of were computers on wheels. Without the software, they were just expensive paperweights. The refrigeration units on the reefer trailers were controlled by the central server to optimize fuel. When the server locked, the cooling units went into safety mode and shut down. Millions of dollars of ice cream, medicine, and meat were currently melting in trailers across the country. "Make it stop!" Kylie screamed, covering her ears to block out the ringing phones. "I cannot," Hunter whispered. "I don't have the password." He ran to his laptop. He opened it frantically, trying to log into the cloud backup. Maybe he could restore an old version. Maybe he could find a workaround. He typed in his username, Hunter Whitmore, CEO. He typed in his password, King of the World 123. He hit enter. The screen did not load his dashboard. It turned red, the same message. Access denied. User account suspended by administrator. Administrator. There was only one administrator, the man he had put in jail. Hunter realized then that he was not the king. He was a squatter. He had thrown the owner out of the house, but he did not know how to operate the furnace or the lights. And now winter had come, and he was freezing in the dark. He grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Kylie yelled. "I have to go to the police station," Hunter said, his voice hollow. "I have to talk to Alonzo." "You cannot," Kylie said, grabbing his arm. "You had him arrested. If you go there and beg for help, you look weak. You admit that you need him." "I don't have a choice," Hunter shouted, pulling away from her. "The fish is rotting, Kylie. The trucks are stopped. Every minute we are down costs us $10,000. Do the math. We will be bankrupt by sunrise." He ran out of the office, leaving Kylie alone with the red screens and the screaming phones. He took the elevator down to the garage. He got into his car and jammed the key into the ignition. But as he drove out onto the street, he hit traffic. The gridlock was terrible. And then he saw why. A Hayes Global delivery truck was stalled in the middle of the intersection, blocking all 4 lanes. The driver was standing on the hood, waving his arms, shouting at the angry commuters. Hunter stared at the truck. On the side of the trailer, painted in bright letters, was the company slogan, "Moving the future." The future was not moving. It was stuck in neutral. And the man who held the keys was sitting in a cell, watching the clock tick and waiting for the inevitable phone call. The kill switch had worked perfectly. The silence of the arrest was over. The noise of the collapse had begun. The executive suite of Hayes Global looked like the bridge of the Titanic moments after hitting the iceberg. The red light from the locked screens bathed the room in a hellish glow. Hunter was pacing back and forth, wearing a path into the expensive carpet I had paid for. He was holding 2 phones, one to each ear, screaming at people who could not help him. On his left hand was the external IT support firm. On his right hand was the vice president of operations. Neither of them had answers. They only had problems. "I am not paying you to tell me what you cannot do," Hunter shouted at the IT consultant. "I am paying you to bypass the firewall. It is just code. Break it." "I cannot break it, sir," the voice on the line said, loud enough for me to imagine it clearly. "This is a hardware lockout. The server has physically disconnected itself from the network. It is in a fail-safe mode. Unless we have the master encryption key, we would need a supercomputer and 100 years to crack it." Hunter threw the phone against the wall. It shattered, leaving a dent in the plaster. He did not care. He turned his attention to the other phone. "Just send the trucks anyway," he yelled at the operations VP. "Tell the drivers to use paper maps. Tell them to drive manual." "We cannot do that." "Sir," the VP stammered, "the trucks are electronic. The ignition interlock is tied to the central server. If the server says no, the engine does not turn over. We have 3,000 trucks that are effectively bricked. They are heavy metal statues blocking highways from New York to Los Angeles." Then the third phone rang. It was the red phone on the desk, the private line. Hunter froze. He knew who it was. There was only one person who had that number and would be calling at this hour on a Sunday night. It was Julian from TechStream. Hunter picked up the receiver with a trembling hand. "Julian," he said, trying to sound calm. "We are experiencing a minor technical glitch. We will have it sorted in an hour." "Hunter, stop lying." Julian's voice was cold as liquid nitrogen. "I am looking at my dashboard. Your entire fleet has gone dark. You have 0 uptime. Do you know what that means?" "It means we have a delay," Hunter said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But we can fix it. It means you are in breach of contract." Julian cut him off. Section 9, Clause 2. If uptime drops below 90% for more than 4 hours, the penalty clause activates. You have been down for 6 hours. "We can work this out," Hunter pleaded. "Just give me until morning." "There is nothing to work out," Julian said. "My lawyers are drafting the paperwork right now. You owe TechStream $50 million in performance penalties." And since I know your operating company does not have that kind of cash on hand, we are exercising our lien on your accounts receivable. We are freezing your bank accounts, Hunter. Every penny that comes in goes to us until the debt is paid." "Wait," Hunter screamed. "You cannot do that. That will bankrupt us. We won't be able to pay payroll." "You should have thought of that before you signed a contract you could not honor," Julian said. "You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to restore service. If the system is not green by the opening bell of the stock market, I am going public with the breach. Your stock will be worth less than the paper it is printed on." "Good luck, Hunter." The line went dead. Hunter stood there holding the receiver. $50 million. He didn't have $50 million. He didn't even have $5 million. He had spent the reserves on the rebranding. He had spent the safety net on the party. He dropped the receiver onto the desk. It clattered loudly in the silent room. That was when the screaming started. Kylie had been sitting on the leather sofa scrolling through her phone, watching the social media backlash begin. Drivers were tweeting pictures of their stranded trucks. Customers were posting angry reviews. The brand she had worked so hard to polish was being dragged through the mud. "You idiot!" Kylie shrieked, standing up and throwing her phone at Hunter. It missed him and hit the window. "You told me you had this under control. You told me the software deal was a sure thing." "It was a sure thing," Hunter yelled back, his face turning purple. "It was supposed to be automatic. How was I supposed to know the old man booby-trapped the system?" "Because you are the CEO," Kylie screamed. "It is your job to know, but you are not a CEO, are you, Hunter? You are just a little boy playing dress-up in his daddy's suit." "Do not talk to me like that." Hunter stepped toward her, his fists clenched. "I made you who you are. Without me, you are just a waitress from the suburbs. And without Alonzo, you are nothing." Kylie laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "You fired the only people who knew how to run this place. You arrested the man who built it. And now you have destroyed my reputation. Do you know what people are saying online? They are calling us the clueless couple. They are laughing at us, Hunter." "I don't care about your Instagram likes," Hunter roared. "I am trying to save the company. I need money. Where is the maintenance fund? The one you said we could borrow." "I spent it," Kylie said, crossing her arms. "You what?" Hunter stared at her. "All of it. The gala cost money, Hunter. The flowers, the champagne, the gift bags. You wanted to look rich, didn't you? You wanted to show everyone that we were better than Alonzo. Well, we looked great while we were doing it. You spent $300,000 on a party." Hunter grabbed his hair, pulling at it in frustration. "That was our emergency fund. That was the money I needed to pay the lawyers to fight TechStream. You are pathetic," Kylie spat at him. "You are broke. You are incompetent. And I am leaving. I am going to my mother's house. I am not going to be here when the police come to evict us." She turned to grab her purse, but Hunter blocked her path. "You are not going anywhere," he said. "You are in this with me." "You signed the checks too, Kylie. If I go down for negligence, you go down for embezzlement." They stood there in the red light of the dying server, hating each other. The love they claimed to have was gone, evaporated the moment the money stopped flowing. They were two rats trapped on a sinking ship, fighting over the last crumb of cheese. The door to the office flew open. It was Sterling, the lawyer Hunter had hired to destroy me. But Sterling did not look confident today. His tie was crooked, his face was gray. He was holding a thick binder, the original incorporation documents of the company. "Hunter, stop fighting," Sterling said, his voice breathless. "We have a bigger problem than TechStream." "What could possibly be bigger than $50 million, Hunter asked, not taking his eyes off Kylie. "I just finished reading the master source code agreement," Sterling said, walking over to the desk and slamming the binder open. "I had to go down to the basement archives to find it. It was filed 20 years ago." "So what?" Hunter said. "It is an old contract. It doesn't matter." "It matters," Sterling said, pointing to a paragraph on the last page. "Because I found the unlock protocol. The system was designed by Alonzo and a military contractor. It has a biometric override." "Great," Hunter said, hope flickering in his eyes. "So we just need a fingerprint." "Get Barney. Get one of the old mechanics." "It is not just any fingerprint," Sterling said, shaking his head. "The contract is specific. In the event of a catastrophic system lockdown caused by a license dispute, only the biometric data of the registered intellectual property owner can reset the server." Hunter went silent. He looked at Sterling. He looked at the red screens. "Say it," Hunter whispered. "It is Alonzo," Sterling said. "Only Alonzo. We need his thumbprint on the physical server in the basement. No one else. Not you, Not me. Not the board of directors. If Alonzo does not touch that scanner within 24 hours, the data wipes itself. Permanent deletion. The customer database, the financial records, the shipping logs, everything goes to zero. Hunter sank into his chair. The same chair he had kicked me out of. He realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had arrested the only man who could save him. He had put the savior in a cage and thrown away the key. He is in jail. Hunter whispered, his voice barely audible. I put him in jail. Then you better get him out, Sterling said, closing the binder. And you better pray he is in a forgiving mood, because right now Alonzo Hayes is not just the chairman, he is God, and you are a sinner in the hands of an angry deity. Hunter looked at the phone on his desk. He knew what he had to do. He had to make the call he swore he would never make. He had to beg. The panic was no longer about money. It was about survival. He reached for the receiver, his hand shaking so badly he could barely dial the number for the precinct. Monday was going to be interesting. But Sunday night was the longest night of his life. The clock on the wall of the executive suite ticked loudly in the silence of the locked-down building. It was 2 a.m. The city of Chicago was asleep, but inside the glass tower of Hayes Global there was no rest. The emergency lights bathed the office in a harsh crimson glow, creating deep shadows that danced in the corners like ghosts. Hunter sat at the desk that used to be mine. He was staring at the telephone as if it were a loaded gun. For the past hour, he had walked circles around the room. He had loosened his tie until it hung limp around his neck. He had rolled up his sleeves, exposing the expensive watch that was now counting down the minutes to his destruction. I can only imagine the war that was raging inside his head. Hunter was a man built on pride. He had spent his entire life convincing himself that he was better than me. He told himself that he was smarter because he went to the right schools. He told himself he was more deserving because he had the right bloodline. To him, I was just the mechanic who got lucky. I was the stepdad who smelled like oil and didn't understand fine art. To pick up that phone and call me was not just an admission of defeat. It was a shattering of his entire identity. He had to admit that the MBA and the fancy suits and the rebranding strategy were all useless without the one thing he despised. Me. He looked at the red screens again. The message was still there. License expired. It was mocking him. He thought about the morning. He thought about the investors arriving at 8 o'clock. He thought about Julian from TechStream waiting to seize the bank accounts. He thought about the headlines. CEO bankrupts company in 1 week. The fear of humiliation finally outweighed the fear of submission. He realized that if he did not call me, he would lose everything. The house, the cars, the reputation. He would be nothing. And being nothing was the one thing Hunter could not survive. He reached out his hand. His fingers were trembling so violently he had to use his other hand to steady them. He picked up the receiver. It felt heavy. He dialed my number. I know he dialed it slowly, hoping that maybe I wouldn't answer, hoping that maybe a miracle would happen before the last digit was pressed. But there are no miracles for the arrogant. There are only consequences. I was sitting in my armchair in the small apartment. I was not sleeping. I was drinking a cup of herbal tea and listening to a Miles Davis record on a portable player. I was calm. I had been waiting for this moment since the day he fired me. When the phone rang, I did not pick it up immediately. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder if I had changed my number. On the 4th ring, I answered. Hello, Hunter. I did not ask who it was. I did not ask why he was calling. My voice was level and devoid of emotion. Hey, Alonzo. Hunter's voice was high-pitched and breathless. He was trying to sound casual. He was trying to sound like a son calling his father to catch up and not a drowning man begging for a life vest. I hope I did not wake you, Hunter said. I know it is late. But we have a bit of a situation down here at the office. A situation I repeated. Is that what you call it? Yeah, it is just a technical glitch, Hunter said, letting out a nervous laugh. The system seems to have locked up. The IT guys say it is some old legacy code that needs an override. We figured since you know the old systems better than anyone, you could come down and take a look. Maybe give us a hand. We could pay you a consulting fee. I took a sip of my tea. The audacity of this boy was truly limitless. He had me arrested 6 hours ago, and now he was offering me a consulting fee. You want me to come down there? I asked slowly. To the building I was banned from, to help the company that fired me, to assist the CEO who put me in handcuffs. Hunter went silent for a moment. I could hear his breathing on the other end. It was ragged. "Look, Alonzo, let us not dwell on the past," Hunter said, his voice tightening. "We both said some things we didn't mean. The arrest thing, that was just a misunderstanding. The lawyers got overzealous. I can make that go away. I can drop the charges tomorrow morning." "You can drop the charges," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "That is very generous of you, Hunter. But I am not worried about the charges. The police already know the truth. They know I own the software. They know you are running pirated code." Hunter's facade began to crack. The casual tone vanished, replaced by panic. "Okay, fine, you own the software. You made your point, Alonzo. You proved you are smart. Congratulations. Now please turn it back on. We are losing millions. The trucks are stopped. The drivers are freezing. Do it for them. You always said you cared about the employees' right. Prove it. Turn the server back on." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. "I do care about them, Hunter," I said. "That is why I am doing this. I am saving the company from you." "What are you talking about?" Hunter screamed, losing control. "You are destroying the company. If we default on the TechStream contract, we are dead." "We are not dead, Hunter," I said coldly. "You are." "Alonzo, please." Hunter's voice broke. He was crying now. I heard the sob in his throat. "I will give you anything. I will give you a seat on the board. I will give you the chairman title back. Just come down here. I need you. I cannot do this alone. I don't know the passwords. I don't know the protocols. I am scared, Alonzo. Please help me." For a second, just a brief second, I felt a twinge of pity. I remembered the 10-year-old boy I used to take to baseball games. But then I remembered the way he looked at me at Esther's funeral. I remembered the way he laughed when the police put me in the car. He was not sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. If I saved him now, he would learn nothing. He would wait 6 months and try to stab me in the back again. "I am not coming down, Hunter," I said. What? Hunter gasped. "But you have to." "No, I don't. You wanted to be the CEO. You wanted to be the man in charge. Well, this is what being in charge feels like. It feels like weight. It feels like responsibility. You cannot outsource this. You cannot hire a consultant to carry your burden." "Alonzo, wait," Hunter begged. "I am done waiting," I said. "You have a board meeting at 8 a.m. I suggest you spend the next few hours preparing your resignation speech. Because when I walk into that room tomorrow, I am not coming as your stepfather. I am coming as your creditor." "But I can't fix it," Hunter wailed. "I know," I said. "That is the point. Good night, Hunter." I hung up the phone. On the other end of the line in the penthouse office, Hunter stared at the receiver in his hand. The dial tone buzzed in his ear, a flat, monotonous sound of finality. He dropped the phone onto the desk. He looked at the red screens. They were still there, unchanging, unforgiving. He let out a scream. It was a primal sound of rage and despair. He grabbed the expensive crystal lamp from his desk and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. He grabbed his laptop and smashed it against the floor. He kicked the chair over. He tore the paintings from the walls. He destroyed the office just like he had destroyed the company. He fell to his knees in the middle of the wreckage, his chest heaving, his expensive suit ruined. He was alone in the red light. The silence of the room was deafening. He realized then that the silence of the chairman was not a sign of weakness. It was the calm before the execution, and the executioner was coming in the morning. The sun rose over Chicago on Monday morning, but inside the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Hayes Global Tower, it felt like the middle of a long, dark winter. The air conditioning was humming, but the 20 people seated around the massive oval table were sweating. These were the shareholders, the board of directors, the men and women who controlled the money. And right now they were looking at Hunter Whitmore with the kind of hunger usually reserved for a pack of wolves encircling a wounded deer. Hunter sat at the head of the table. He looked nothing like the arrogant prince who had fired me a week ago. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. His eyes were bloodshot from a night spent destroying his own office. He was clutching a coffee cup with both hands, trying to stop them from shaking. On the wall behind him, the giant screen was still displaying the same red error message that had haunted him for 24 hours. License expired. The room was filled with the sound of angry voices. A man named Mr. Henderson, who represented the pension fund that owned 15% of the company, was standing up, pointing a finger at Hunter. "This is unacceptable," Henderson shouted, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "We have lost 30% of our market value in pre-market trading. The news is calling us the Titanic of the trucking industry. Techstream has filed a lien against our accounts. We cannot even pay for fuel, Hunter." "What is your plan?" Hunter tried to speak, but his voice was a dry rasp. "I am working on it," he croaked. "It is just a negotiation tactic. Alonzo will come around. Alonzo is in jail." Henderson yelled, slamming his hand on the table. "You put him there. You arrested the founder of this company on charges that look increasingly like a fabrication to cover your own incompetence. And now we hear reports that he owns the software. Is that true, Hunter? Does the man you threw in a cell hold the keys to this building?" Hunter looked down at the table. He could not make eye contact. "It is complicated," he whispered. "It is not complicated," a woman from the investment bank cut in. "It is negligence. We are voting to remove you as CEO effective immediately, Hunter. We need to stabilize this ship before it sinks completely." "But you can't." Hunter pleaded, looking up with desperate eyes. "I am the majority shareholder. I inherited my mother's stock. You cannot fire me." "We can if you are in breach of fiduciary duty," Henderson said. "And bankrupting the company in 5 days is the definition of a breach." The room erupted into shouting again. Everyone was talking over everyone else. They were arguing about liquidation. They were arguing about selling off the assets. They were carving up the carcass of my life's work, while the boy who killed it sat there and watched. I stood outside the double oak doors, listening to the chaos. I adjusted my cuffs. I checked my tie in the reflection of the glass wall. I looked at the team standing behind me. To my right was Sienna, my lawyer. She was holding a thick leather binder that contained the truth. Her face was calm, sharp, and ready for war. To my left was Barney. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a brand new Hayes Global mechanic uniform, crisp and clean, with his name stitched over his heart. Behind Barney were 10 other men and women, the senior dispatchers, the fleet managers, the head of HR, the people Hunter had fired. They were the heart of this company. They were the ones who knew how to make the blood flow through its veins. I looked at Barney. "You ready for this, old friend?" I asked. Barney cracked his knuckles. He looked at the doors. "I have been ready since Tuesday, boss. Let us go take back our house." I reached out and pushed the doors open. They swung inward with a heavy, majestic weight. The noise in the boardroom stopped instantly. It was as if someone had cut the power to a speaker. 20 heads turned in unison. They saw me standing there. Alonzo Hayes, the man they thought was in a holding cell, the man they thought was a thief. I did not walk in quietly. I walked in with the heavy, rhythmic stride of a man who owns the floor he is walking on. My team followed me. We fanned out, entering the room like a phalanx. Barney stood next to me, his arms crossed, his presence radiating the quiet strength of the working class. Hunter stared at me. His mouth fell open. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Alonzo," he whispered. "How did you—" I ignored him. I walked straight to the other end of the table, directly opposite Hunter. I placed my hands on the back of the empty chair that usually belonged to the vice chairman. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single board member. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice filling the room without shouting. "I apologize for being late. I was detained by a misunderstanding involving your current CEO and the Chicago Police Department." Henderson looked at me. He looked confused, but also relieved. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "we were told you were being held without bail." I smiled. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "But I am not here to talk about my legal troubles. I am here to talk about your debt." Hunter stood up. He knocked his coffee cup over, spilling cold brown liquid across the polished wood. "You cannot be here," Hunter shouted, his voice cracking. "Security, get him out. He is trespassing. He is a criminal." He looked toward the corner of the room where the head of security was standing. It was Mike, the same guard who had looked at me with shame when I was kicked out on Tuesday, the same guard whose family I had helped when his daughter was sick. Mike Hunter screamed, pointing at me, "Remove him, now, that is a direct order." The room held its breath. All eyes turned to Mike. Hunter was technically still the CEO. He was the boss. To disobey him was insubordination. Mike looked at Hunter. He looked at the coffee dripping off the table. He looked at the disheveled panic of a boy playing king. Then he looked at me. He saw Barney standing there in his uniform. He saw the team of loyal employees. He saw the man who had built the walls he was paid to protect. Mike took a step forward. He adjusted his belt. He looked Hunter dead in the eye. "I am sorry, Mr. Whitmore," Mike said, his voice steady and deep. "But I cannot do that." Hunter's face turned red. "What do you mean you cannot? I pay your salary. I am ordering you to throw this man out." "No, sir," Mike said. "You sign the checks, but you don't pay the salary. The salary comes from the company. And according to the bylaws, security answers to the board of directors. And right now, it looks like the board is listening to Mr. Hayes." "You are fired," Hunter shrieked. "You are all fired. I will hire new guards. I will hire the police. Get out, all of you." Nobody moved. The silence in the room was heavy. It was the weight of power shifting. It was the sound of gravity changing direction. Hunter was shouting at a storm, expecting the wind to obey him. I leaned forward, resting my knuckles on the table. "Sit down, Hunter," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the authority of 40 years of leadership. It was the voice that had commanded fleets during blizzards. It was the voice that had negotiated with unions and senators. It was a voice that did not ask for permission. Hunter stopped shouting. He looked around the room. He saw the board members looking at him with disgust. He saw Mike standing with his arms crossed. He saw Barney glaring at him. He realized in that moment that he was completely alone. He sank back into his chair, defeated. I turned my attention to the board. "You are wondering why the screens are red," I said, pointing to the wall. "You are wondering why the trucks are stopped. You are wondering why TechStream is seizing your assets." I gestured to Sienna. She stepped forward and placed the leather binder on the table. She opened it to the page with the master service agreement. "This is the answer," I said. Hunter Whitmore thought that Hayes Global was a kingdom he inherited. He thought the trucks and the software and the brand were just toys in a box. But he was wrong. Hayes Global is an operating entity. It is a tenant, and I am the landlord. I walked slowly around the table toward Hunter. "For 10 years I have leased the intellectual property and the physical assets to this company for a fraction of their value," I said. "I did it because I wanted the company to grow. I did it because I wanted to protect the jobs of the people who work here. But the lease has conditions." I stopped right behind Hunter's chair. I could smell the stale sweat of his fear. "Condition number 1, I said, looking at Henderson. "The company must maintain the fleet according to the Hayes Protocol." Hunter fired the only mechanics who could do that. "Condition number 2, the company must remain solvent." Hunter spent the reserves on a party. And condition number 3, I placed my hand on the back of Hunter's chair. He flinched. "No legal action may be taken against the intellectual property holder." I looked down at Hunter. "You sued me, Hunter," I said softly. "You arrested me. You accused me of stealing my own rent money, and in doing so you triggered the default clause." I looked back at the board. "As of Sunday at noon, the lease is terminated. I am recalling my assets, the trucks, the software, the brand. They all belong to Hayes Intellectual Properties. And since Hayes Global has no assets, no cash, and no leadership, it is effectively insolvent." Henderson looked at the binder. He looked at me. His face was pale. "So what are you saying?" Alonzo Henderson asked. "Are you shutting us down? Are you destroying the company?" "No," I said. "I am not destroying it. I am repossessing it." I tapped Hunter on the shoulder. "Get up, son," I said. Hunter looked up at me. There were tears in his eyes now. Real tears of a child who has broken a toy he cannot fix. "Where am I supposed to go?" he whispered. "I don't know," I said. "But you cannot stay here. That is my chair." Hunter slowly stood up. He looked small. He looked fragile. He walked away from the head of the table. He walked past the board members who refused to look at him. He walked past Barney, who stepped aside to let him pass. He walked past Mike, who opened the door for him but did not salute. When the door clicked shut behind him, the room let out a collective breath. The toxicity was gone. The infection had been removed. I sat down in the chair. It felt familiar. It felt right. I looked at Barney. "Barney," I said. "Yes, boss. Go down to the server room. Place your thumb on the scanner. Then have your team start the engines. We have a lot of deliveries to make." Barney smiled. It was a smile that lit up the room. "On it, boss." I looked at the board members. They were waiting for me to speak. They were waiting to see if I would punish them for siding with Hunter. "Gentlemen and ladies," I said, opening the binder, "we have a lot of work to do. We need to restructure the debt. We need to apologize to our customers. And we need to rebuild the trust we lost. But first, we are going to hire back every single person who was fired this week. And we are going to do it with a raise." Henderson nodded. Agreed, Alonzo. Whatever you say. I looked at the red screen on the wall. As Barney reached the basement, the red flickered. It turned to black. And then, one by one, green lights began to appear. The map of North America returned. The heartbeat of the company started to thump again. I leaned back in my chair. The king had returned. And this time the kingdom was going to be built on rock, not sand. The boardroom was silent, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the vacuum of space before a star collapses. Hunter stood by the window looking at the skyline he thought he owned. He turned back to the table, his face flushed with a mix of anger and confusion. He pointed a shaking finger at me and then at the board members. "This is illegal," Hunter shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You cannot just walk in here and declare yourself the owner. My mother left me the majority shares in her will. I have the documents. I am the owner of Hayes Global Logistics. I own 51% of the stock. You cannot take that away from me." I sat calmly in the leather chair. I watched him flail. It was like watching a man try to swim in quicksand. The harder he fought, the deeper he sank. I did not speak. I simply nodded to Sienna. Sienna stood up. She did not look at Hunter. She looked at the board members. She opened the leather binder she had been carrying. The sound of the heavy paper turning was the only noise in the room. She adjusted her glasses and began to speak in a tone that was professional, clinical, and devastating. "Mr. Whitmore is correct about one thing," Sienna said. "He does indeed own 51% of the stock in Hayes Global Logistics Incorporated. That entity was left to him by the late Esther Hayes. However, Mr. Whitmore seems to fundamentally misunderstand what that entity actually is." Hunter slammed his hand on the table. "It is the company. It is the trucks. It is the buildings. It is everything." "No," Sienna said, looking up. "It is not. Hayes Global Logistics Incorporated is a service provider. It is an operating shell. It was created 20 years ago for liability purposes. Its sole function is to hire drivers, manage schedules, and pay taxes. It does not own any physical assets." The room went deadly quiet. Henderson, the representative from the pension fund, leaned forward. "Explain that again." Henderson said, his eyes narrowing. Sienna turned a page in the binder. She held up a diagram. It showed two boxes. One was small and labeled Hayes Global. The other was massive and labeled Hayes Holdings. "Alonzo Hayes is the sole proprietor of Hayes Holdings, LLC," Sienna explained. "This holding company owns the title to every single truck in the fleet. It owns the deeds to the distribution centers in Chicago, Detroit, and St. Louis. It owns the copyright to the brand logo. And most importantly, it owns the proprietary source code for the logistics software." She looked at Hunter, who was now leaning against the wall looking like he might vomit. "For the past 10 years, Sienna continued, Hayes Global has operated under a master lease agreement. It rents the trucks from Hayes Holdings. It licenses the software from Hayes Holdings. It leases the buildings from Hayes Holdings. The operating company that Mr. Whitmore inherited is essentially a tenant, and Mr. Hayes is the landlord." "But my mother," Hunter stammered. "She said she left me the business." "She left you the operating rights?" Sienna corrected him. "She left you the job, Hunter. She left you the responsibility of running the day-to-day operations. But she knew that you were young and inexperienced. She knew that the assets needed to be protected. So she and Alonzo agreed that the hard assets, the real wealth, would remain in the holding company under Alonzo's control. It was a safeguard, a way to ensure that if the management failed, the assets would not be lost to creditors." I finally spoke up. My voice was low and rough like gravel. "She was protecting the company from exactly this situation, Hunter," I said. "She knew that one day someone might come along who cared more about image than substance. Someone who would spend the maintenance fund on parties. Someone who would fire the mechanics to save a few pennies. She wanted to make sure that person could never sell the trucks to buy a yacht." Hunter looked at me. His eyes were wide with panic. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," Sienna said, closing the binder with a sharp snap, "that you own 100% of nothing. The stock you hold is for a company that has no assets. Its value is derived entirely from its contracts with Mr. Hayes. And as of yesterday, those contracts are void." This was the moment of the guillotine drop. The logic had been laid out. The trap had been sprung. Now it was time for the sentence. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the whiteboard at the front of the room. I picked up a marker. I wrote a single number on the board, 0. "This is the value of your inheritance as of this morning, Hunter," I said. I turned to face the board. They were staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. They realized that they had backed the wrong horse. They had bet on the jockey who wore the fancy silks instead of the owner who fed the horse. Under the terms of the master lease agreement, I said, reciting the words I had written myself decades ago, the landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease immediately upon any breach of contract. I held up 3 fingers. Breach number 1. Failure to maintain the assets. By firing the certified mechanics, you violated the maintenance clause. Breach number 2. Insolvency. By spending the reserve fund, you violated the financial stability clause. Breach number 3. Hostile action against the owner. By arresting me and accusing me of theft, you violated the good faith clause. I lowered my hand. Therefore, I am officially exercising my right to recall all assets. Effective immediately, Hayes Holdings is repossessing every truck, every trailer, and every computer terminal. We are revoking the software license. We are removing the signage from the buildings. I looked at Hunter. You have a company, Hunter, but you have no trucks to drive. You have no software to route them. You have no buildings to park them in. You have a list of customers and a lot of debt, but you have no means to generate revenue. You are the captain of a ghost ship. Henderson stood up. He looked at Hunter with pure venom. Is this true? He asked me. Can you really do this? It is already done, I said. My team is currently down in the lot putting new decals on the trucks. They are changing the registration. The software has been patched to reject any login from your domain. But the clients, Henderson asked. The contracts? I smiled. The clients want their goods delivered. They don't care about the name on the invoice. I have already reached out to the major accounts. I offered them a new contract with Hayes Holdings. They all signed this morning. Why wouldn't they? I have the trucks. I have the drivers. I have the software. Hunter has a hangover and a lawsuit. I walked back to the table and picked up the glass of water that had been sitting in front of Hunter's empty chair. I took a sip. So, gentlemen, I said, addressing the board, you have a choice. You can stay on the sinking ship with Hunter. You can try to sue me. You can try to fight this in court for the next 5 years while the company goes bankrupt. Or you can vote to dissolve Hayes Global Logistics Incorporated right now. You can liquidate the shell company and I will offer you a swap. I will trade your worthless stock for shares in Hayes Holdings. I will bring you onto my board. We will keep the business running without interruption. It was not really a choice. It was a lifeline. I was offering them a way out of the disaster Hunter had created. Henderson did not hesitate. He looked at Hunter. I move to dissolve the corporation, he said. I second the motion, said the woman from the bank. Hunter let out a sound that was half sob and half scream. You cannot do this, he yelled. This is my company. My mother built this. Your mother built it with me, I roared. My voice shook the walls. I laid the bricks. Hunter, I turned the wrenches. I drove the routes when you were still in diapers. She built this for us, not for you to destroy. She built it to provide for the family, not to feed your ego. I walked up to him until I was inches from his face. You wanted to be a big man, Hunter. You wanted to play with the big boys. Well, this is how the big boys play. We read the fine print, we protect our assets, and we don't bite the hand that feeds us. Hunter looked at me. For the first time, I saw the total collapse in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a scared child who realized he was naked in the snow. He looked down at his hands. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. He looked at the red error screen that was now fading to black. I am ruined, he whispered. I personally guaranteed the TechStream loan. If the company goes under, they will come after me. They will take my house. They will take everything. I know, I said coldly. You signed that deal without reading it, remember? You wanted the credit. Now you have the debt. But I will go to jail, Hunter cried. If I can't pay the debts, they will charge me with fraud. I looked at him. I thought about the night he had me arrested. I thought about the cold cell. I thought about the way he laughed. Monday is interesting, isn't it, Hunter? I said. I turned my back on him. Get him out of here, I said to Mike, the security guard. Mike stepped forward. He put a heavy hand on Hunter's shoulder. Let us go, Mr. Whitmore, Mike said. Hunter let himself be led away. He did not fight. He did not shout. He dragged his feet like a prisoner walking to the gallows. He walked out of the boardroom and out of the life he had taken for granted. When the door closed, the room was silent again. But this time it was the silence of a battlefield after the war is won. I looked at the board members. They were waiting. Let us get to work, I said. We have a lot of trucks to move. Sienna handed me a pen. I signed the first document of the new era. The signature was Alonzo Hayes. and it was written in ink that would never fade. The vote to remove Hunter Whitmore as CEO of Hayes Global Logistics was not a debate, it was a disposal. The board members did not look at him as they raised their hands. They looked at the spreadsheets. They looked at the projected losses. They looked at the terrifying reality of a zero-revenue week. Henderson called for the motion, and every single hand in the room went up. It was unanimous. In less than 60 seconds, the reign of the prince was over. Hunter stood at the head of the table, gripping the back of the chair that he had claimed was his birthright. His knuckles were white. He looked like a man who had been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He tried to speak, but his voice was thin and shaking. "You cannot do this," he stammered. "I am the majority shareholder. I have rights." "You have equity," Henderson said, coldly closing his folder. "You do not have executive privileges. We are removing you for cause, Hunter. Gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and frankly for being the single greatest liability this company has ever faced. You are out, effective immediately." Hunter looked at me. He looked for a hint of sympathy. He looked for the stepfather who used to bandage his scraped knees. But that man was gone. That man had been arrested and humiliated. The man sitting across from him now was the chairman of Hayes Holdings, and I had no mercy left to give. "I suggest you pack your things, Hunter," I said. "Security will escort you to the elevator. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal items from the office." Hunter turned to Kylie, who was standing near the door. She had been quiet, hoping to fade into the wallpaper, hoping that if she stayed still enough, the lightning would only strike her husband. "Come on, Kylie," Hunter said, reaching for her hand. "We are leaving. We will call our lawyers. We will sue them for everything." Kylie pulled her hand away. She looked at Hunter with pure disgust. "We?" she asked. "There is no we, Hunter. You are the one who got fired. You are the one who ruined everything. I am not going anywhere." Hunter stared at her. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Even in his final moment of defeat, his partner was abandoning him. But before Hunter could take a step toward the door, Sienna stood up. She cleared her throat. The sound was sharp and commanding. It stopped Hunter in his tracks. "Not so fast, Mr. Whitmore," Sienna said. "And you too, Mrs. Whitmore. Please take a seat. The board meeting is adjourned, but the legal inquiry is just beginning." Hunter stopped. "What are you talking about? I am leaving." "You can leave," Sienna said, opening a new file on the table. "But I do not think you will make it very far. You see, while Mr. Hayes was reclaiming his assets, I took the liberty of conducting a forensic audit of the company accounts for the last 6 months, specifically the discretionary spending accounts that you and your wife have been accessing." Kylie turned pale. She took a step back toward the exit, but Mike, the security guard, blocked her path. He crossed his arms. He was not smiling. Sienna pulled out a stack of bank statements. She slid them down the long, polished table. They fanned out like a deck of cards, revealing line after line of highlighted transactions. The maintenance fund that Mr. Hayes established was strictly for fleet repairs and emergency equipment replacement, Sienna explained to the horrified board members. However, according to these records, $300,000 was transferred out of that fund in the last 2 weeks alone. It was not paid to mechanics. It was not paid to parts suppliers. She picked up the first sheet. $50,000 to a luxury event planner for the rebranding gala. $20,000 to a jeweler in Paris for a diamond bracelet. $10,000 for a weekend retreat at a spa in Aspen. Sienna looked at Kylie. And my personal favorite, $15,000 for a custom wardrobe consultation listed in the ledger as uniform redesign. The board members gasped. Henderson picked up one of the statements. His hands were shaking with rage. "This is theft," he whispered. "This is not just mismanagement. This is criminal fraud. You stole corporate funds to pay for your lifestyle while the company was bleeding cash." Hunter tried to find an excuse. He tried to spin the lie one last time. It was for the brand, he shouted, sweat pouring down his face. "We had to look successful to attract investors. It was a marketing expense. A diamond bracelet is not marketing," Sienna said, her voice slicing through his excuse like a razor. "And neither is the down payment on a Porsche, which you made last Friday using the payroll account. That is why the driver's checks bounced, Hunter. You did not just spend the reserves, you stole their wages." Kylie started to cry. It was a loud, theatrical sobbing. She pointed a shaking finger at Hunter. "He made me do it," she wailed. "I didn't know where the money came from. He told me it was his bonus. He told me we were rich. I am a victim here." Hunter looked at her with betrayal in his eyes. "You are a liar," he screamed. "You chose the bracelet. You booked the spa. You told me that if I didn't buy you these things, you would leave me." They stood there screaming at each other, accusing each other, tearing each other apart. It was ugly. It was the rot of their souls finally exposed to the light. They were not partners. They were accomplices who had turned on each other the moment the heat got too high. I did not enjoy watching it. It was pathetic, but it was necessary. The board needed to see exactly who had been sitting in the captain's chair. Then the double doors opened again. This time it was not a lawyer. It was not a security guard. 4 men in dark blue windbreakers walked into the room. On the back of their jackets in bright yellow letters was the word police. They were followed by 2 detectives in suits. These were not the beat cops Hunter had sent to arrest me. These were from the Economic Crimes Unit. They did not look like they were there to make a mistake. One of the detectives stepped forward. He held up a warrant. "Hunter Whitmore and Kylie Whitmore," he announced, his voice filling the stunned room. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and securities fraud." Hunter froze. He looked at the police. He looked at the window. He looked for a way out. But there was no way out. The walls he had built to keep me out had become the walls of his own prison. "This is a mistake," Hunter whispered. "My stepfather. Ask him. He will tell you." He turned to me. His eyes were wide and pleading. "Alonzo, tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will pay it back. I swear. Just don't let them take me." I looked at him. I sat perfectly still. "I cannot help you, Hunter," I said. "I am just the landlord. I don't interfere with the tenant's business, especially when that business is crime." The detectives moved in. They did not use gentle hands. They grabbed Hunter by the arms and spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and metallic. Click, click, click. It was the same sound I had heard 3 days ago, but this time it sounded like justice. Kylie tried to run. She actually tried to dodge past Mike, but she tripped on her high heels and fell to the floor. The female officer pulled her up and cuffed her hands behind her back. Kylie was screaming about her rights, screaming that she was a Whitmore, screaming that this couldn't be happening to her. But it was happening. "Take them away," the detective said. They led them out. The procession of shame moved slowly past the long table. The board members turned their chairs away, refusing to look at the disgraced couple. Hunter walked past me. He was only 2 feet away. He stopped for a second. The detective tried to push him forward, but Hunter dug his heels in. He looked at me. His face was streaked with tears and sweat. He looked like a child who wanted his father to fix it. "Dad," he whispered. The word hung in the air. He hadn't called me that in 20 years. I did not look at him. I did not turn my head. I did not blink. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, focused on the empty leather chair at the head of the table. The chair that Esther had bought. The chair that I had earned. I reached out and placed my hand on the armrest of the chair. I felt the cool, smooth leather. It was solid. It was real. It was the only thing in the room that mattered. Alonzo, Hunter pleaded, his voice breaking. "Look at me, please." I picked up a pen from the table. I opened the file Sienna had placed in front of me. I began to read the restructuring plan. "Get him out of here," I said to the empty air. The detective shoved Hunter forward. The crying started again, a low moan of despair that faded as they dragged him down the hallway. The elevator dinged, the doors opened and closed. And then they were gone. The room was silent, the air felt lighter. The smell of expensive perfume and fear was fading, replaced by the smell of coffee and old paper. I finally looked up. I looked at the chair where Hunter had sat just 10 minutes ago. It was empty. The usurper was gone. The pretender had fallen. I stood up and walked to the head of the table. I pulled the chair out. I sat down. It groaned slightly under my weight, a familiar welcoming sound. I spun it around so I was facing the window, looking out at the city of Chicago. The trucks down on the highway were moving again. I could see the tiny white rectangles with the Hayes logo flowing through the arteries of the city. I turned back to the board. They were watching me, waiting for orders. "The fall is over," I said. "Now we rise. Let us get to work. The hardest part of a war is not the fighting. It is the cleaning up." The boardroom was empty, and the police had left with their prisoners, but the building was still filled with the wreckage of Hunter's tenure. There were invoices that had not been paid. There were customers who had been screamed at. And most importantly, there were hundreds of employees who were terrified for their futures. They had watched their colleagues get fired. They had seen the company almost collapse. They needed more than just a paycheck. They needed to know that the ground beneath their feet was solid again. I walked down from the executive suite to the main loading dock. This was the heart of Hayes Global. It was a cavernous space filled with the smell of diesel and cardboard and hard work. I asked Mike, the head of security, to gather everyone, the drivers, the warehouse staff, the dispatchers, the mechanics. They gathered in a semicircle around a stack of pallets. They looked tired. They looked wary. They did not know if I was there to save them or to finish what Hunter had started. I did not stand on a podium. I stood on the concrete floor right in front of them. I looked at the sea of faces. I saw men and women I had known for 20 years. I saw new hires who looked scared. "I owe you all an apology," I said. My voice echoed in the large space. "I let this happen. I built this company to be a fortress, but I left the gate unlocked. I thought that by stepping back, I was giving the next generation a chance to lead. But I was wrong. I gave a loaded weapon to a child. And because of my mistake, you all suffered. You lost sleep, you lost wages, you lost your sense of security. For that, I am truly sorry." The room was silent. They were not used to hearing a CEO apologize. Hunter had never apologized in his life. "But sorry does not put food on the table," I continued. "And sorry does not guarantee that this will not happen again. I realized this week that a company cannot belong to just one family, because bloodlines can get weak, characters can get corrupted. The only people who truly care about the survival of this business are the people who bleed for it every day." I signaled to Sienna. She handed me a stack of papers. "As of this morning, I have dissolved the old operating structure I announced. We are forming a new entity, and under the new charter, 30% of the company's stock is being transferred into an employee stock ownership plan." A murmur went through the crowd. They looked at each other. They did not understand at first. "It means you are not just employees anymore," I said, raising my voice. "It means you are owners. If the company makes a profit, you make a profit. If the stock goes up, your retirement goes up. And most importantly, it means that no one can ever sell this company out from under you again, because you will have a vote on the board." The shock turned into smiles. Then the smiles turned into cheers. It started with Barney clapping his heavy, grease-stained hands. Then Mike joined in. Then the drivers. Soon the entire loading dock was shaking with the sound of applause. It was not polite applause. It was the sound of relief. It was the sound of loyalty being returned. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands. I signed checks to cover the bounced payroll from my personal account. I listened to their stories. I rebuilt the bridge that Hunter had burned. I was tired. My bones ached. But my heart felt lighter than it had in years. After the meeting, I called Barney into my office. He was still wearing his mechanic uniform, but I had a new badge waiting for him. I placed it on the desk. It read, "Director of Fleet Operations." Barney stared at it. He wiped his hands on his pants before touching it. "Boss," he said, "I fix engines. I don't sit in meetings. I don't know how to wear a tie." "You don't need to wear a tie, Barney," I said. "You need to wear your experience." Hunter fired the experts because he was threatened by them. I am promoting the experts because I need them. You know more about these trucks than the engineers who designed them. I need you to run the maintenance division. I need you to train the young guys. I need you to make sure that no Hayes truck ever breaks down on the highway again. Barney picked up the badge. His hands were shaking slightly. "I won't let you down, Alonzo," he said. "I know you won't," I replied. "Now get out of here. You have an office to set up, and Barney, take the iPad. You are going to need it to approve the budget." Barney laughed. He took the badge and walked out. He walked a little taller. He wasn't just a dinosaur anymore. He was the apex predator of the garage. While we were rebuilding, the world outside was tearing Hunter and Kylie apart. The news of their arrest had gone viral. But the internet is a cruel judge. For years, Kylie had curated a perfect online life. She posted photos of her clothes, her cars, her vacations. She bragged about her success. She made people envy her. But now the curtain was pulled back. Social media did not pity her. It devoured her. The mugshot of Kylie with her mascara running and her hair a mess was trending on every platform. People were dissecting her old posts, pointing out the stolen money in every picture. "Nice bracelet," one comment read. "Too bad it was bought with stole driver wages." Another user posted a video of Kylie screaming at a waiter from a few months ago. The caption read, "This is the real face of the Hayes heiress." Her followers dropped from 100,000 to 0 overnight. The brands she had partnered with issued statements distancing themselves. Her reputation was incinerated. She had lived for the applause of strangers, and now she was dying by their jeers. She had lost her freedom, but the loss of her digital fame was the punishment that would hurt her the most. She was no longer an influencer. She was a cautionary tale. As for Hunter, the legal experts were predicting a 5-year sentence. The fraud was too documented. The arrogance was too public. He would spend his 30s in a cell thinking about the empire he had held in his hands and crushed. He would have a lot of time to think about the difference between price and value. The sun began to set over the city. The sky turned a deep purple, bruising into black. The office was quiet. The red screens were gone, replaced by the steady green hum of a working system. I walked through the empty hallways. I turned off the lights in the conference room. I looked at the spot where Hunter had stood and begged. The ghosts were gone. I took the elevator down to the garage. My Lincoln Town car was parked in the VIP spot. It was clean and polished, but I walked past it. I walked to the back corner of the lot where a rusted 1995 Ford F-150 was parked. It was my first truck. I had kept it running all these years. I opened the door. The hinge creaked. The cabin smelled of old leather and dust. I climbed in. The engine turned over with a rough mechanical roar. It was a sound I loved. It was the sound of honesty. I drove out of the garage and onto the street. I did not go home. I drove north toward the cemetery. The gates were open. I drove slowly along the winding path until I reached the hill where Esther was buried. I parked the truck and got out. The air was cold, but the wind had died down. It was peaceful. I walked to her grave. The dirt was still fresh from the funeral a week ago. The flowers Hunter had ordered were dead and brown. I cleared them away. I knelt down on the grass. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the set of keys to the executive suite. The keys Hunter had demanded from me. The keys to the kingdom. I placed them on the headstone. "I did it, Esther," I whispered. "I saved it." It got a little messy. I had to be hard. I had to be someone you might not recognize for a few days. But the house is clean, the people are safe, and the boy has been stopped. I touched the cold stone. "I miss you," I said. "The silence is loud without you. But I am going to keep working. I am going to teach the next generation what you taught me, that a legacy is not what you leave for people, it is what you leave in people." I stood up. I wiped the dirt from my knees. I looked at the city lights twinkling in the distance. They looked different tonight. They didn't look like targets to be conquered. They looked like lights in the windows of families waiting for their packages. I walked back to my truck. I climbed in and rested my hands on the steering wheel. I was 68 years old. I was alone, but I was the chairman. And tomorrow, there was work to do. I put the truck in gear and drove out of the cemetery. The road ahead was dark, but my headlights cut through it strong and bright. Monday had been interesting, but Tuesday was going to be good. I learned that a legacy cannot be given, it must be earned. Hunter thought he could inherit respect along with the stock certificates, but he found out that respect is a currency you have to mint yourself every single day. I learned that silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is just the quiet before the strike. And most importantly, I learned that no matter how old you get or how much the world changes, the fundamentals never go out of style. Hard work, loyalty, and knowing how to fix what you break will always win against a fancy suit and an empty promise. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to remind someone of your true worth. I read every single one. Until next time, keep your engine running and your eyes on the road.